Panthers and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I am Nolan Kelly. Joining me is Ben Rasa, the world's foremost expert on
Yeah.
all things college football
Okay.
and degenerate gambling. Ben, how did the Rwanda-Seychelles game turn out the other day?
Yeah, man, that was little World Cup qualifiers. Got that out of the way. Now we can focus on what most people would say is the important thing, which is showdown tonight. Got a pretty
I
good
don't
game here, but
50-50. Those are two
right?
big games right there.
That's right.
Also joining us, Alex Osmo Baker, the world's #1 fantasy player. Alex, what's happening?
Not much, man. Looking forward to the game tonight. Should be a good one, man. I
This is
love.
actually a good Thursday night game. Like, I know sometimes these Thursday nighters can be pretty bad, but I've been looking forward to this all week.
Yeah, I mean, like any time you have Jameis Winston, you got me interested. And this being my first showdown show, I'm especially excited because this is the one show where we can tell everyone exactly who we're playing, and you can split the 250K with us.
Sounds like a plan.
Because you know it's going to be split, right?
It usually is, I suppose. Last time it wasn't. So if you're real sneaky, maybe you can find that lineup that no one else has. But
Right.
your odds of cashing in not as good. So there's some balance there.
So you're saying Brashad Perriman in the captain spot tonight.
Yeah,
I
that's
like
what I'm talking about.
it.
So before we get started here, just want to read out some from our sponsor, Fantasy Draft. I've been playing on there recently, and I really like it a lot. It's the only rake-free daily fantasy site in the business right now. They have some packages where you can just pay per month, which is amazing because the rakes are about like far less than any other site. I guess you wouldn't even call them rakes, but you basically pay a fee, and then you don't have to pay rakes. You don't have to pay rakes anytime you play. So go check it out. They have an amazing contest as well this year. Another 100% of entry fees paid to contest winners. You can sign up, use promo code AWESOMO, and you get a free 7-day trial membership on your first $1,000 in rake-free entries. You got to be 18 or older to play, though. So we're going to break down this slate a little bit. We're going to talk first about the Panthers, then about the Bucs. Then we're going to talk a little bit about ownership, and then just general lineup construction. So why don't we start things off with just your initial impressions of this slate? Ben, what do you think?
I mean, Alex already mentioned it. Anytime you got Jameis in the game, anything can happen. We saw last week he made the Niners defenses racking up the points. Tampa did not look good. Then you got Carolina, who, I really liked them in the game last week. They did not win against the Rams, but they held their own. This is a game, I would say not a must win. It's only week 2, but they need a game like this in the NFC South. So they're at home. They're about a touchdown favorite, but it's certainly a good one for showdown. I think a lot of things are in play. We're going to get into the specifics, but just looking at the game on a macro level, it's a pretty good one to break down.
Yeah, 48-point total. What are you doing with Cam Newton now? Because we have Tampa was giving up the 5th most amount of points to quarterbacks last season. Are you buying into the notion that he is not 100% recovered from his shoulder injury? He's got a pretty plus matchup here. Tampa Bay 30th ranked in DVOA. Pretty weak secondary. How are you rostering? How are you treating Cam Newton tonight?
I like Cam Newton a lot. I mean, anytime you have a quarterback in showdown, they're going to be one of the highest projected players on the slate, and this is no exception. I mean, you got McCaffrey, who is probably one player that usually projects higher than quarterbacks, but he's the only guy. So I think that I'm not as high on Cam because he's not running the ball as much this year, according to reports, and in the first game. But he's still a fantastic player, and he's a quarterback, which means he'll get a steady stream of fantasy points most likely.
Ben, are you in the same boat? Or are you buying into any of his shoulder injury stuff? He didn't look too sharp last week. Is that just a case of a one bad week, or is this a lingering injury effect?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned just in general for the Panthers. Now tonight, he's certainly viable. I will say that just in general, Cam hasn't been as aggressive around the goal. Not just last week, but he has been a little reluctant to run. Maybe that's because he's been banged up, and if he's healthy, we'll see that again. And then we're going to get to the elephant in the room soon enough with Christian McCaffrey is going to be insanely popular. There are ways to maybe get leverage while rostering him. We're going to deep dive into that. But like Alex said, normally the quarterbacks have the highest floor. The way the Panthers use McCaffrey never comes off the field. He It's inconceivable, barring injury, to think that he really has a gutter ball type game with the volume he sees.
Well, he was on the field for 100% of the snaps last week, which I believe was the only running back in the NFL. Alex, are you getting to a lot of McCaffrey in your captain slot?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a guy that any slate he's on, he's usually one of the top plays by projection. And this slate, this is a one-game slate. He's far and away the best fantasy player. Just a PPR monster. I mean, he gets a ton of passes, and that just racks up fantasy points. It gives him a lot more consistency than other players. So I think that if you go with usually I like wide receivers and quarterbacks in the captain slot because there's an advantage there, because if one goes off, if the quarterback goes off, the wide receivers are going off. If the wide receiver goes off, his quarterback's going off, at least when it comes to showdown scoring. Like, Christian McCaffrey is almost a wide receiver because of how many passes he gets. So if I'm putting him in the captain slot, I'll also consider having Cam Newton and maybe going for some value plays around them.
I like that. 80 yards receiving last week, led the team in targets with 10 catches on 11 targets. Yeah, 81 yards. He was their top receiver last week, so I don't think anyone is too concerned about pairing him up with Cam Newton. At least you shouldn't be. Is that what you're doing as well, Ben?
I mean, McCaffrey, of course, is projecting for the best play. I will say what I've done tonight is I've tried to take a pretty aggressive stance where I'm rostering him, but I'm not using him in the captain spot to kind of get leverage almost against the field. I'm hoping that there's a strong correlation between the number of people that use him and they use him in the captain spot. So there's a middle ground there where because I think for his raw points, he's going to get there regardless. But maybe I can catch fire with someone like DJ Moore, with Curtis Samuel, more high variance guys that they could be my captain. I save some salary on the field and build like that.
I like it. We've got right now DJ Moore. We've got him projected for 12% captain ownership. But if you want to dip down to Curtis Samuel, you're getting a bit of a bargain on that. So I like where your head's at. Let's talk about these wide receivers. Alex, do you have a preference between these two fantasy football season-long August sleepers that disappointed a little bit last year? Will you be stacking them in the same lineups? Will you be stacking them with Cam Newton lineups? How are you approaching attacking these Panthers receivers tonight?
Yeah, I think that Moore and Samuel are probably the only options you can go to. Well, I guess Greg Olsen, Jarius Wright, they're all kind of in the mix.
Chris Hogan's on this team. Come on.
I'm not on Chris Hogan. Before I put Chris Hogan in a lineup, I would unregister from every tournament I'm in.
Self-exclude before doing
If you're putting Chris Hogan...
I need to adjust my crunches here.
Yeah, sorry, Nolan, man. So the problem is Chris Hogan, although he was on the field a ton when he was on the Patriots with the Panthers, he only played 5 snaps last week out of 66. So he's not on the field enough to really make a difference in fantasy. I mean, they could change this week very well, but given that people know who this guy is, I'm expecting him to be overrun today.
That seems like sound logic. So any preference? Do you prefer DJ Moore over Curtis Samuel?
So I think it's going to come down to price, because DJ Moore is a guy I have projected to be a better receiver than Curtis Samuel. Curtis Samuel is someone who is not the most efficient with his targets, although he is targeted a lot when he's on the field, and this year he's moving up to a full-time role. So should be a good year for him compared to last year. But DJ Moore is a better player, and he is rightfully priced higher than Curtis Samuel in both Draftkings and Fanduel. 1K in Draftkings and 2K in Fanduel. But even considering that, I mean, that's not enough to make up for the difference in talent, I think.
I like it. I'm on the same boat as you. I'm pro DJ Moore. Ben, tell us who you favor out of those two and what you're doing with your tight ends tonight. Greg Olsen. Do you have any Ian Thomas shares? Is he gonna see the field at all? Get any action tonight with that Olsen nagging injury?
So again, when you don't use Christian McCaffrey in the captain spot, you have a little more luxury with your pricing. So I was able to comfortably get to DJ Moore where I wanted to. Nothing against Curtis Samuel, just if I had the option of the two. it would be more, we saw double-digit targets last week. I think that's a reasonable, outcome, even in games where they may not be trailing late. If Olsen was sitting, Ian Thomas would be a player would be going in depth. He would probably be one of the biggest chalk salary, Shaheen style from the Bears game against the Packers. I'm really indifferent to either of them. Olsen is going to be on the field a lot. There's a lot of mouths to feed, and we've talked about McCaffrey. He's not just a running back; he swallows a ton of volume in the passing game. So I don't have a ton of interest in either of the Panthers tight ends outside of just he'll be on the field, and then you're always somewhat live.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat as you. It's all about these Panthers wide receivers. Let's just before we move on to the Buccaneers, just a quick note about what we've got at Osmo.com. We've got some amazing NFL premium stuff, premium packages on offer. So head on over to osmo.com/join, and you can see what we've got. We have stuff for novice players. We have stuff for experienced players. We have packages starting for $3.95 per week. Alex, can you tell us a little bit about this new stacks tool that you've got for showdown slates?
Yeah, you can go on the website if you're Express or Core member and see this. I run a bunch of simulations to determine what the chances of each player being the top scorer on the slate are and the chance of them being in the top 6, because you got 6 players in your roster. I suppose I should change it to 5 for FanDuel. So this is actually a very interesting problem mathematically speaking, because it's so much different from game to game. For example, in the Bears, Mitch Trubisky throws to so many different guys, and there's Allen Robinson, but he doesn't even make up enough share of the pie. So he's so much more likely to have a big game than any of the individual skill position players. But on the Panthers, where the production is much more concentrated, you're going to find that the skill player, Christian McCaffrey, is much more likely than a different team to be the top scorer. So let me pull up my numbers here. You can find this on the menu bar under NFL. I have McCaffrey as a 43% chance to be the top scorer on Draftkings. On FanDuel, he's at 33%. So if he is the top scorer, you're most likely going to need him in your captain position or MVP on FanDuel. Not a guarantee because of the salary cap, but given his production, that's going to happen an overwhelming amount of the time. Cam Newton, on the other hand, I have at 17% on Draftkings, but 32% on FanDuel. So that's because on Draftkings, McCaffrey's PPR just gives him so many more fantasy points, whereas FanDuel, quarterbacks score more than skill position players on average, so Cam's a better play on FanDuel than Draftkings at captain.
All right, makes sense. So if you're heading over to FanDuel, make sure to get Cam Newton in your lineups. And that is one of our premium features at Osmo.com. So help us out. Head on over, check out the site, and we also have packages you can use promo code from the slot and get half off your first week. So let's dive into the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They kind of did not have the greatest game in week 1 against the 49ers, to say the least. Your boy Jameis Winston, 3 picks, 2 pick sixes. I don't know how you do that and get to start the next week, but here we are. No, I was pretty high on Jameis heading into this season. I'm still a believer. What about you, Ben? Are you a believer in Jameis, and how much are you getting to him tonight?
Well, yeah, I mean, it comes with I'll say that. I think a lot of people who are Jameis truthers, not that I am, you're going to get some games where you're just like, how is this guy starting? And then he's going to have some big games. That's why in best ball formats and things like that, there was appeal. And in a situation like this, there's appeal because we know he's going to be slinging it around. The picks are really not that big a deal. It's a point. You don't mind if he threw it. Sometimes it's a good thing for game script if he threw a pick 6. Now we'll get to Carolina's defense and whatnot, but Jameis is in play. He's got weapons. Probably going to be trailing. Like we said, the Panthers are at home. They're a touchdown favorite. I have no problem with him. It's priority list in terms of salary. Again, I have a little more wiggle room without McCaffrey in that captain spot, but you're not going to be able to, of course, take McCaffrey in both quarterbacks, things like that. It gets too dicey too quickly.
Yep, that makes sense. Alex, any general thoughts on Winston tonight?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite roster constructions tonight would be playing the Winston pick six. So you stack up all the Buccaneers, and then you take the Panthers defense and hope the Panthers offense just never gets the ball, because that seems like it could happen. I mean, this guy, as you mentioned, throws a ton of picks. The only reason he's still starting is because playing Gabbert's the backup. If Fitzmagic was on the team, I mean, like, he'd be starting for sure this game. But
This is a brilliant lineup construction. I like it a lot.
yeah, you never think about stacking all five of your players with against your defense, but this is the best game where that could actually work. I still don't really recommend it, but it could be a good laugh, and that's why we're all playing these showdown slates. I mean, you can make a lot of money on them too, but also they're very entertaining.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, so I think that I didn't get to a lot. I noticed I didn't get to a lot of defenses in your projections, but we'll touch on that. We'll touch on that a little bit later. These Buccaneers wide receivers, we have quite a few options. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, the top options today. Mike Evans has had some troubles with James Bradbury. He's had 4 shadow matchups over the past 2 seasons, only eclipsed the 60-yard mark once. Ben, what are you doing with Mike Evans tonight? And do you prefer him over Chris Godwin?
I prefer him over Chris Godwin, but that's more just because, I think the top end ceiling is still there for Evans. Godwin is a guy that I expect him to just have a pretty standard fine game. Those Carolina receivers that we already talked about are more my priority, just because I think there's a little more variance in their games. Mike Evans is a talented guy. You did mention he's kind of struggled in this matchup, but if the Bucs have any hope, it seems like he's going to have to do some heavy lifting. We're going to touch on the running backs in a second, and it's a rarity to think that they can carry the load. So just by volume, I'm certainly getting to some Evans. Not really in my captain spot per se, but it's a guy that, if I can afford it, no problem rostering him.
I'm on Team Godwin tonight. I have a feeling Alex is going to be on Team Mike Evans. Just a quick stat for you: the Panthers have been torched by slot receivers recently. They haven't given up less than 60 yards to a slot receiver, including 90 to Juju, 130 to Tyler Boyd last year, 80 to Adam Humphries. This is one of the weak spots of their defense. So I like Godwin. I think it's a bit of a mismatch as well, as opposed to Evans, who has probably a tough matchup with a physical corner like Bradbury. Alex, what say you?
Yeah, I like them all. I mean, like, I hate to straddle the fence like this, but I mean, Evans, not one of the league's best receivers, but he's up there. That means there's going to be a ton of variance every time he steps on the field. And last game he did poorly, and I think that means people will be more apt to play Chris Godwin, who, I mean, he got a lot of hype in season long because he's in an improved position this year playing full-time, when last year he was a rotation player. So I think that the public is probably trending towards Godwin, and if you want to make money in DFS, the better strategy is to fade the public and go Evans. I know that the matchup might not be as good because Evans is number 1, Godwin's number 2, but I'm not completely sold on the wide receiver cornerback matchups, because like the way I see it is like so much of what a bad cornerback does is they'll commit penalties. And you don't get any points for like a pass interference,
That's a good point. Yeah, it's something that we probably struggle to quantify a little bit sometimes when we look at our data is just how many penalties and how many yards and how much that affects fantasy, because you obviously don't want to be targeting cornerbacks that take a lot of penalties because you don't get points. But maybe they should do that one day. Just have like a points contest where you get penalties for, or like have one slate each week where you get points for penalties.
I mean, if they wanted to make it so that in fantasy the best players get the highest fantasy totals, pass interference would for sure count as yards, in my opinion. But
that would be very tilted.
Yeah, there's so much tradition in fantasy football that I don't see it happening.
Yeah, it's like defenses. Defenses shouldn't be punished for getting touchdowns scored against them by the offense, but here we are. It's 2019 and we can't figure that out. Ben, any thoughts on Brashad Perriman, the third wide receiver for the Buccaneers? Didn't really get a lot of action last week. He had 4 targets, 2 receptions, 10 yards, but he was second in the NFL in targeted air yards last week. Does that entice you at all? Are you going to be using him in GPPs?
It does. He got some looks. It didn't materialize, which is a good thing. I think what people naturally do when you have 1 week is everyone just looks what happened last week and kind of is like, oh, okay, now I know everyone's role. And that's just not how it works. I know it's kind of just counterintuitive in a ways. I'm looking for guys that it kind of feels like an outlier, so I can try to correct it before everyone adjusts. And I'm not saying Perryman fits that, but he is on the field enough. Again, they should be trailing. So if you do use, say you want Jameis in the captain spot and you want to pick 2 or 3 of his targets and load up, run it back with some of those Panthers, I think that's very viable. And Perryman would be in that mix for me.
All right, I like it too. I'm trying to fit as much Perriman in as possible. I feel like he's one of those guys that has like that big game potential. It might not be realized, but it looks like he's won that third receiver, that third receiver pretty handily. They're not really giving much action to anyone else. Maybe Bobo Wilson if you really want to get deep in large GPPs, but that's about it. So let's talk about these tight ends. We have Cameron Brate, who got 2 touchdowns called back last week, I think on the same drive against the 49ers. He's always been a favorite target of Jameis Winston. And then you have O.J. Howard, everyone's favorite early summer sleeper at tight end. He had 5 targets last week, 4 receptions, 32 yards. Very unimpressive start. Alex, what are you doing with these tight ends? I noticed that in your stacks column, O.J. Howard looks like he's going over-owned compared to how you have him projected.
O.J. Howard was one of my biggest disappointments of week 1 because there was so much hype about that he would really seize all the playing time from Cameron Brate this year. But when it came down to what happened in the game, they basically went 50-50 on the routes. Obviously, O.J. Howard is a much better receiver than Cameron Brate, so I have him a lot higher than Brate, but I think the hype is a little bit too high on him, and based on the salary, it might be a little bit harder to get to him than some wide receivers that are probably going to be more productive on average, and since we're not worried about positions in Showdown, I'll probably opt to go that way more.
Ben, do you have any thoughts on the two?
Yeah, Brate is always tough because he's, in Showdown where points are minimized since we only have 1 game, him falling in the end zone once can make the difference. Like that can be part of an optimal. Normally, I would say, I don't like to look to guys that only may get a couple targets and you're just banking on a red zone share in a main slate. That's just not enough upside. But something like this, it can work. O.J. Howard, Alex just mentioned it. He's clearly long term, he's the better player. He's got a lot more upside. He's a more dynamic cover for the Panthers, but he's going to be more popular. And that, part of Showdown, like any of these slates, is being cognizant of, where can you let the field chase and kind of zig when, they zag. So I don't really have a strong take. When I'm using Jameis, obviously I'm more inclined to use someone like Howard just because I want as many pass catchers with him as possible.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Alex, I know you like to use 2 tight ends occasionally in your regular contests, using a tight end in that flex spot because it's a bit of a pivot off what the field does. Is that any advantage in these Showdown slates? Have you found at all? Will you be pairing up 2 tight ends tonight as a contrarian move?
I think there is some negative correlation between Brate and Howard because the Buccaneers typically only run 1 tight end for a passing route each snap. So I probably wouldn't go out of my way to have both of them in the lineup. It would probably be something I'd avoid more often than not. But because there are so few possibilities tonight, I don't hate pairing them up. But I think Brate is really on the fringe of my radar. He's not going to be a core play for me.
All right, I like it. We got one more position group to go here in for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Running backs, bit of a confusing situation. We have Dare Ogunbowale. I think I said it right. Ben, did I say it right?
Sounds good to me.
He's a third-year tight end, I believe, out of Wisconsin, who was really involved in the Wisconsin passing game in his final 2 years. Caught 50 balls. I think he was a backup to Corey Clement. We have Peyton Barber, who was the most boring running back in the history of the NFL, though he did have 4 targets last game. And we have Ronald Jones. He broke off a couple decent runs, started to get a little bit more playing time towards the end of the game. finished with a 13.75 line, but wasn't involved in the passing game too much. Ben, what are you doing with this weird three-headed monster in Tampa?
So normally, if it was a main slate, it would be I'd let other people try to hero call it and stay away. But you don't have that luxury in a situation like that. So you kind of have to embrace it and say, okay, what's the reasonable outcome? When it's a running back by committee in a hot hand, it's actually something that I think gets a bad rap in the sense that if one of the guys gets going, he can just turn into the workhorse for that week. I think Ronald Jones is the most likely to do that. I have the most interest in him out of the three. He just, he got it going a little. He didn't get as much work in the passing game, but I think people shy away because they just assume it has to be a split. That's not necessarily the case week to week.
Right. Yeah. No, I think you're spot on there. Alex, do you have a take on that?
Yeah, I think that hot hand is in general good for DFS because players are priced for their roles, and when a role is in flux, that gives them a little bit more upside than if their role is constant. In this situation, I think that Ronald Jones had the best game last week. Peyton Barber did pretty poorly, so I might take some shots on Barber, hoping that flip flops, because I think we all know that that's something that could happen if Barber just gets it going. I mean, he probably won't because he's not very good and the offensive line stinks, but I like going there. Dario Gumbawale. I gotta give a shout out to my WNBA fans, brother of Enrique.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I knew that name from editing our WNBA article.
Yeah, you probably had to fix her name a lot.
No wonder you could pronounce it.
Well, Seth can't spell Brittany Griner, so I'm guessing he had a little bit of trouble with that one.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that he played a lot more than I expected last week. He's going to be the third down back, and that's a productive position for fantasy given his price tag. He's one of the cheapest guys that's going to be out there on the field regularly tonight. And for that reason, I think that he's a pretty good play, especially on DraftKings where he's 2,400. I mean, a third down back in fantasy with PBR is pretty decent. And I think we're all expecting that the Bucs will have plenty of third downs.
Yeah, I think that's true. They're probably if you're looking at the game script a little bit, they're 7-point dogs. That usually means pass catching backs get a little bit more involved in the offense, get a small uptick there. His price point on DK is really nice at 2,400. So I know I'm going to be overweight on the field. Ben, are you going to be overweight?
So he's a guy. There's a handful. What I'd like to do in Showdown is there are certain players that are purely game script guys for me. Like he is one of them. I don't think he can thrive in any situation where somehow the Bucs get a lead and they slow it down and they're running the ball. Kind of what the environment is if he gets there, and it's easier to build around him. So you say, okay, I'm going to plug him in because I think he has a good game. Well, if that's the case, Carolina's probably putting up points. Jameis and them are trailing, and he's getting in there more and more on passing downs. It's a big downgrade to the other running backs, of course, and it's a boost to the Bucs' offensive weapons on the outside. So I have no problem going to him because, like you guys said, the price is really appealing, and he's a pretty easy player to break down because kind of where they're going to use him. There's less kind of variance within him.
All right, that wraps up the skill position portion of tonight's episode. Let's talk about what we're all here for: defense and kickers.
Now we're talking. It's right in my wheelhouse.
I think there was a kicker on that winning lineup last week, wasn't there? Or was it just Packers D? I think was the big one. What are you doing with kickers and D tonight, Alex?
Kickers are always one of my favorite positions to play in Showdown. I think that the chance that a kicker has the best performance of a game is relatively low, but the chance that they're one of the best values is pretty high. I mean, a lot of games kickers will score. Kickers score on average between 7 and 10 points depending on the team. And if they exceed that, there's a pretty good chance they're going to be in the optimal lineup at the end of the night. Defense, one note I'll have is if you're using Fantasy Cruncher like me on Draftkings Fanduel, they don't have defense, but make sure to go in advanced options and change offensive players versus defense because it defaults to 0. last week I made my lineups and I didn't have any defense. And
Ooh.
yeah, I was like, man, shoot, I gotta recrunch this. So I went back and did it all over again. But since it's one game, it's somewhat possible to do that.
That is exactly why I think I didn't get any defense. I thought that your defense projections were just not solid tonight, but I just realized that's exactly why. I was like, man, like it's pretty rare to get zero defenses in 150 lineups. Thanks for that tip.
For sure, man. Yeah, I think that the Panthers defense, as we've been mentioning, Jameis Winston has a propensity to throw some interceptions, so I like them. Buccaneers to a lesser extent. I mean, Carolina is a little bit better at ball security, and that's the main thing I'm looking for. There should also be some sacks in this game, and that can be good for getting some defensive touchdowns too. So I think that it's pretty reasonable to go to defense on DraftKings.
All right, Ben, thoughts on kickers? We got Matt Gay going for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and we got Joey Sly going for the Carolina Panthers. Do you like either one of these kickers more? And are you echoing Alex's statement on the defenses?
So what happened to Graham Gano, by the way? I didn't even.
You got beat up, man.
Times are changing. Sad. Kickers, their range of outcomes is one of the smallest on any slate because they can't get to a ridiculous number barring something insane, and most likely, even if it's just a couple extra points in a field goal, they're going to get a handful of points. So the less fantasy points to go around, generally, the more optimal it is to get to kickers. Pretty high scoring game here, so they're going to get some points, but at the same time, the skill position guys, it's very possible that this shoots out a bit and it becomes harder for them to maintain. So good floors, bad ceilings. That's what you get with them most likely. On the defensive side, Alex summed it up nicely. You want pressure, you want turnovers. Carolina doesn't really, Cam, he makes some mistakes here and there, but he's not out of control with it. Jameis is the king of that. So you can use Jameis with Carolina's defense, in my opinion. I have no problem with that. I know it's counterintuitive, but he can turn the ball over a couple times, and then he needs to play catch up. That actually helps your lineup in a way. So Carolina's the defense that I'm targeting, despite having some Buccaneers stacks. Not 5-1, but I still have some Jameis with some Carolina defense.
All right, I like it. I like that Carolina defense stack. So I think I'm gonna follow your advice there, Alex, and get to it. Let's talk a little bit about roster construction. Or sorry, let's talk about ownership a little bit. So Christian McCaffrey, our highest projected owned player. Ben, is there anyone that you're pivoting off of from ownership perspective? Let me just give you a little rundown of like our top projected guys. It's looking like Christian McCaffrey, number one. DJ Moore's up there. Cam Newton. What if any of these top owned guys that are above 40%, which are pretty much the usual suspects, are you looking to fade tonight?
So for me, I think that since it's one game, I'm actually trying to leverage by how I construct rather than who I play. McCaffrey is just too good for me to just say I'm making a stand, I'm not playing him. I think that's just ill-advised. But for me, not using him in the captain spot is a way to kind of be a little creative where maybe he only has, 15 points for a change, not 50. And I can get a little boost on the field and be a little unique because there's going to be a large percentage of people that have him in the captain spot. He's going to be the most popular captain. And if you are a little different there, it can be a way to get leverage despite having popular guys on your team.
Nice. Alex, any thoughts? Any fades for you due to ownership or positions?
Yeah, I think the one tool that's useful for determining this is my top showdown plays. I see that one guy that is really popular, we mentioned him, OJ Howard. We had projected him to be 8% owned at captain, 43% total. On Fanduel, 1% captain, 22 total. But based on my projection, which are free tonight, by the way, you can get the showdown projections for this game on the website. OJ Howard has about a 20% chance to be one of the top 6 players on DraftKings and a 10% chance on FanDuel. So he's owned at a much higher rate. I think that kind of confirms this idea that people still think OJ Howard is going to be a fantasy difference maker this year. I don't think that people took into account enough the evidence in Game 1 where Cameron Brate was on the field so much. So I think that if I was gonna fade anyone, which I probably won't because it's there's so few choices to make, but I don't think I'm gonna have as much O.J. Howard as the field.
All right, yeah, I like that too. I think it's interesting that we were talking a little bit about how like there's some recency bias, but at the same time, it looks like the opposite effect with Howard, and people are getting back on. This is a kind of it's a difficult matchup to predict because it's the Panthers are sort of middle of the pack in defending tight ends, so. And you got Brait kind of coming in there and maybe taking some goal line snaps away from him as well. So I like where your head's at on that one. What about let's talk a little bit about lineup construction. Do you have any general thoughts on lineup construction, Alex, when you're approaching these slates? Do you think that there's a certain one like 5-1, 3-3, 4-2? Do you think that certain ones go under owned or over owned? And do you think that there are ones that are more successful than others?
Yeah, I got a couple of strategies here. One, I mean, stacking your team, so 5 players on one team, one on the other. In NFL, there's so many like really crappy games, and if one really bombs, then you're gonna have a really good chance of hitting the nuts if you have the team that doesn't score, like a field goal or 7 points or whatever. So I think that gives you a really good chance to win. Another strategy I like is your lineup telling a story. So I think quarterbacks are more valuable as well as wide receivers in Showdown because than running backs or other positions because when you know that a quarterback does well, that allows you to pick some wide receivers and get that correlation. Or if you pick a wide receiver captain like Mike Evans, then you want Jameis Winston in because if Evans gets a touchdown or two, Winston is going to be doing pretty well. So I think that picking some correlated players does help your chances of winning.
So when you're building lineups on Fantasy Cruncher, would you set a rule then and say like if I'm rostering James Winston, use at least would you create a group and then say I'm going to use at least 2 of these players or at least 3 wide receivers from the same team, or do you just naturally build the lineups and then and then just kind of go through them and take out the ones that you don't like as much?
Yeah, I think the second option is better but more time consuming because one strategy I do like is stacking up a team and then you have a one off of the quarterback on the other team because if a team puts up an egg, the quarterback's going to be the one that's putting up yards. They could easily be the highest scorer on the team. So I do like that strategy, but I do set rules that if I want a wide receiver, a captain, I want the quarterback in a regular spot. If I have a quarterback, a captain, I want 2 or more of the receivers in my lineup, etc. I mean, you can automate the storytelling, I guess you could say, and that makes it easy to build 150 lineups in a quick amount of time.
Makes sense. Ben, what about you? What kind of construction techniques do you use or strategies when you're building for these showdown slates?
So I definitely agree that just thinking how I naturally would do things, you start building and you click 4 Buccaneers and your first thought is, I got to get a couple Panthers in here. And most people think like that. So when you have 5 of one, the lineup looks weird. It feels like it can't work, but you just have to remember it's one game. And it's just bizarre things happen. Games end 20-0, and then it's like, wow, this team didn't even score. That doesn't happen in a 12-game slate. When you have all these different options, it's a totally different animal. But we're just trying to predict one single game. So off the wall strategies like that can work. Certainly the story, the narrative is the key to Showdown. You see if you pull the CSV after lock and you start looking through, you'll see teams that there's almost no possible way that they could win because if their captain goes off, they don't have any. Say they use Jameis in the captain. If he goes off and if you have no other Buccaneers receivers, you're hoping that he somehow runs all the touchdowns in. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Things like that, you can really just give yourself enough chances. Now you got to hit the right storyline. Does that happen? No, but you know what? That's not the point. You just don't want to give yourself no outs before you even start. Leaving money on the table, of course, is more than encouraged in something like this. You don't have to be nearly as cognizant of what your salary looks like because, again, we're dealing with just one game.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. And I think like, would you say that like 5-1 goes under owned then generally? Is that
I
like
think
is
so.
that part of the reason why you attack it that way?
Yeah, I just feel because again, like naturally, you look at a game and you get into a habit of thinking like, well, if this team's doing this, I got to get a couple from the other side, and your lineups look so much better when it's 4-2 or 3-3. But sometimes you want to, and I think that's where Vegas comes in too. You want to look at the spread and say, okay, what are people going to think when they see the spread, and how likely is it that it could be, a total? If the Bucs win, could they win going away tonight? Could a 5-man Buck stack work? With a high variance team like Tampa specifically, I think the answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes with other games, I would say probably not.
Yeah, yeah. I like where your head's at there, Ben. What, Alex? Do you have any other correlations that people might not be thinking of that you use in these lineups? Like, do you like core? I've seen some articles that say quarterbacks correlate really well together. Do you try anything else other than like really obvious? Quarterback with two receivers. Are there any other stacking techniques that you use in order to gain leverage on the field?
I think the most important ones are the quarterback and his own receivers because his performance is the sum of his receivers. So what Ben's saying is the most important thing, where it's like you can't win if you have Mike Evans a captain and Jameis not in your lineup.
Yep.
But I think there are some other correlations, like we talked about Dare Ogunbowale. Like you don't want to pair him with Peyton Barber or Ronald Jones because it's a different game script that they're going to play in, and that really limits your chance of being successful on a night. So it's more like getting these obvious correlations. I have a ton of lineups with both quarterbacks because quarterbacks are the most productive players in general. Uh,
Now, is that strategy team dependent? Like, would you say that, like, let's say a team like, the New Orleans Saints, they could have Latavius Murray and Alvin Kamara go off in the same game, whereas, like, in Tampa, you're right. Like, you're probably going to have three running backs splitting time, and the likelihood that any of them gets any use is probably, slim to none. So, the idea that, or sorry, not slim to none, but, it's not great. And then the idea that all three of them will go off, or two of them is nuts. Is that team dependent for you?
yeah, I think uh, this isn't really something I go out of my way to do, but I think Latavius Murray in a blowout is the guy getting the run, so it's a little bit different because Kamara is the one that is building the lead, and then Murray is subbed in. In this situation, it's a little bit tougher to see Ogun Bawale building a lead. He's probably going to really only excel in games where they're behind, and that's not
Right.
going to be a situation where this is much less likely because the Buccaneers are no saints, and also because, um, I mean, he's not going to get them to build a lead. Really, he's only in for the third downs.
Right. Yeah. All right. Okay. Let's wrap this up. Ben, final thoughts, final advice for anyone watching, tips, fades, anything I missed?
No, I mean, I think again, we're saying a lot of the same things, but it's a long season with Showdown. You're gonna have a lot of them. First of all, separate your process and then include the game. So you don't want to have a rigid process where you're like, all right, I got to pick both quarterbacks. I got to do this. You got to adapt to the teams on the individual game. So, if this game was the Bills and the Jets, I would be saying a lot of different things. My poor Jets. That's a whole different pod. My poor Jets. But,
Uh,
these are two teams. We know their offenses. So you want to tailor what you see with the personnel to a lot of the different narratives. And basically, you take what we have in front of us with the salaries with these players, and you try to plug them into the narratives that you see playing out based on what we have in front of us.
Good advice, Alex. Final thoughts.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've noticed in Showdown, especially these large 250K to first prizes, is that certain players will go massively over owned. These are the long shot plays that are like $200 or like 44,000 on FanDuel. And tonight, I think that could be guys like Chris Hogan. This is a guy. Apologies if you're on him, but He's got a name brand, so like so many people are gonna look for someone that's 2K and click Chris Hogan, but he's not one of the core players on the team. So even more is like let's see. That's really the guy that's standing out to me, but I'm sure a lot of people will just pick a $200 guy like Chris Manhertz. I don't know, Alex Arma at the fullback, but
Yeah, the guy who
You're
gets
not liking my Bobo Wilson hot take?
Bobo Wilson Bucs defense. You can run it back. He returns their punts.
The crazy thing is, everyone thinks they're being all sneaky when they take these guys, but then they end up being like 1% owned, or even more. Like when it's the Saints on the Showdown and they have their backup quarterback, he's always like 5% owned or something insane.
Oof. Yeah. Oh, Taysom Hill.
Taysom Hill,
Yeah. It's funny. Like he had a couple decent plays in that game, but like the snap count's just not there, so it's really difficult to kind of like get excited about him.
Yeah.
But awesome. All right, gents. We will be back each and every Thursday for the duration of the season. Can't believe it's already week 2 here, but this is going to be a good one. We got 5 minutes left to go before the slate locks here, so we will let you get back to your lineups. Again, we are sponsored by Fantasydraft. If you would like to sign up for rake-free DFS, head on over to Fantasydraft. You just pay a small monthly fee, and you can get rakes much, much lower than the bigger sites. So it's one of the first places I play every week, and you should definitely go and check that out. We have On the Contrary this week with Alex and Chris Baggs and Rich Harderbar. I hope I said that right. Saturday afternoon, so make sure to check that out as well. We have the NFL Strategy Show every morning with Lofty hosting. That is at 11 Eastern. Ben and I are going to be on the betting show tomorrow. We're going to be talking about Ben's horrible week 1 of NFL picks.
Yeah, it's going to be a long show, believe me. We got a lot to talk about.
We're still alive in the Survivor, so that's all that matters.
Barely.
All right, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and we will see you all next week, same time, same place.